Hey, everybody. I'm Michael Popok, and you're on the Webby Award-winning Intersection on the Midas Touch Network. Sometimes we do podcasts like this in defined segments. I'll talk about this story. I'll talk about that story. Sometimes we do what we call internally the weave, which drives the producer slightly crazy. Because we weave together, or a commentator like me weaves together a number of stories to show how they fit together. The puzzle pieces that, because we've been following so closely the stories over the last 6 years, the events emanating from the Trump administration, we're able to sort of piece things together and provide value add as commentators, which is why I think you come to Midas, Legal AF, me, Michael Popok at the Intersection, because we make these linkages that either others aren't making or just not in the way that we're doing it. Because when I do my commentary, it comes through my own life experience, comes through my, 35 years of legal practice, comes from my experience as in-house counsel in a financial services firm, comes from my life experience in joining Ben and the brothers 6 years ago to do what we're doing now. It is not artificial intelligence, it is intelligence. And we count on the intelligence of our audience. That's why we don't talk down, never patronize. We only honor people in our audience, our guests, and the stories. We do justice by the stories at the intersection of law and politics that we talk about. And so I want to kick off today. There'll be a number of weaves today. And we have a special guest right after the commercial break. I'm so pleased to have Dani Bensky, a leader of the Epstein Survivor movement. She tells a harrowing story. You may have caught her with my colleague Katie Fang when they went in a powerful moment to the Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey Epstein Memorial Library. Donald Trump likes to get his name on things. Well, he's got his name on a traveling library, which is literally the printout of every page of the produced Epstein files. It's only half, tip of the iceberg of what really exists, but it's what the government has spoon-fed us. Now bound in a library, and it's one thing for you and me to walk in there because there is a power to the room. It's another thing altogether for a survivor who led the charge to get the Epstein Transparency Act passed, for her to walk into that room and find her name unredacted among the volumes. And so I want to bring Dani Bensky to you when I get to the segment where I weave together multiple stories that all have Jeffrey Epstein, Melania, and Donald Trump and his administration at their center. I think that's a perfect time to do that. Election night in America, again, a runoff in Texas, which we will talk about. It's foregone conclusion. Okay, Paxton's going to win. My producers will tell me if I'm wrong. But even if Paxton wins, and they're not ready to announce it yet, polls haven't quite closed, who cares? That's good for the James Tallaricos of the world. That's good for the Democrats. The harder right the candidates that are selected are, because of Donald Trump's puppeteering, better it is at the general election, at the midterms. As I've said before, nobody wins a game ball at the rehearsal. You don't take your bows at the dress rehearsal. You do it in the game. You do it in the performance. So creating, manufacturing super MAGA little baby Trumpers, little Trump clones in places like Indiana in a state Senate race, or in Texas in the Senate race, that's actually a good thing for the Democrats and their ability to take the House and the Senate. And there's things that have happened in other states like Alabama and South Carolina, which also give us an indication of what's going to happen at the midterms in just several months. Isn't that poetic and beautiful music to our ears language? A midterm in just a few months. I mean, look, we're ripping through the beginning of the summer here. I mean, I know Memorial Day is the official start, but come on. It's already June. Got 5 months to a midterm. 5 months, during those dark periods right after Kamala lost, which seemed so long ago. We were like, will this ever end? 5 months. And political analysts and commentators like myself and others, I just had Paul Blumenthal, from senior writer for HuffPo, on with me. You'll catch that interview tomorrow morning on Legal AF YouTube channel. He said, effectively, as the Wall Street Journal editorial board has said the same thing, Trump is toast and he knows it. And so do the Republicans in the Senate especially. He knows that his time as an effective, political, powerful leader are coming to an end with the midterms. He loses the House, which is a foregone conclusion, and he's toast. He loses the Senate. It's stick a fork in it, game over for the remaining 2 years of his administration. And the sad part is, or the good part is, he knows it. Trump knows it. That's why you're watching the increased velocity of the kleptocracy. Steal as much as you can. What haven't we stolen lately? Oh, right. Let's wipe out, 10 years or 15 years of tax liability in a settlement with my own Internal Revenue Service. And we'll steal that over here while they're looking at my victim weaponization fund for Jan 6ers who beat up on police. While they're doing that, this is what I really care about. 16 years of tax exposure and audit exposure erased by Todd Blanche. Didn't quite go according to plan. And we'll talk about why in a minute. Maybe it's because Donald Trump's on his 4th annual medical exam in 19 months. What insurance plan is he on that gives him 3 annuals in the last year and 4 since 2019? I've lived with parents who are aging into their late 70s and early 80s. My mother made it to 89, my dad to 79. They didn't get 4 annual checkups. My mother had dementia, and she didn't have 3 dementia tests. That's what Donald Trump likes to brag about. When they cornered him, remember when they cornered him 6 months ago about one of his many annual exams? He said, I think I had an MRI, which, by the way, he had a CT exam. And they said, what was the MRI on, Mr. President? I don't know. You don't know? You just took the MRI. Anybody ever taken, put it in we're live tonight, of course, put it in the chat. You ever taken an MRI? Do you forget what part of the body they were looking at in that machine, in that tunnel that you were in? He said, no, it definitely wasn't my head. It wasn't my head. Because I've had 3 cognitive tests, as if that was supposed to make us feel better. At the same time, did you guys catch the New York Times over the long weekend? They took every public statement ever made by the cabinet, Trump's cabinet, and proved to us what we've always understood. They're just bootlickers and sycophants and enablers. Every 6th, according to the analysis, every 6th sentence by the cabinet, any one of them, is something where they're praising their fearless leader or opposing one of his political enemies. This is what the cabinet does in a dictatorship. So now we know why Donald Trump is so insistent and has lost his cotton-picking mind over building a secret hospital under the ballroom or under the East Wing where it used to be. Yeah. If I had to go to an annual exam every 3 months, I would want to have a secret passageway down to medical facilities myself. He's going to be 80. I'm not here at all ever to undermine people in their 70s or 80s. I'm closer to that than I am to my 20s. But if we're going to have presidents who are aging in place, and that place is the White House, we should give them the permission to admit that they're aging and have appropriate support systems and support staff in the White House to guide them. You know, if we had a president in a wheelchair like we did with FDR, you know, you'd hope there was staff around to help him. There should be gerontologists and advisors and experts, and they should come up with schedules that work for people who are not in their 50s and 60s or 40s, but are in their 70s and 80s. You know, we can have another debate about should there be an age limit for the presidency, but if we're going to elect people that old, we should make accommodations for them. And if it looks like they are going down the drain, physically or mentally or both, you know, maybe we need a new amendment to the amendment, a new amendment to the 25th Amendment, which was really passed after the chaos of JFK being assassinated and that tumultuous period before Lyndon Baines Johnson was sworn in to make it more routine. Maybe we need an amendment to the 25th Amendment that talks about aging in place and who can pull the plug, no pun intended, on that type of presidency, something that we need to think about. So when we talk about election night or election nights in America, you know, I guess the one here is Texans are going back to the polls. Cornyn was reasonably popular. Apparently, Cornyn's reasonably popular. Paxton is very popular, but with MAGA, you know, he's got a marriage infidelity and other issues, which is of course not a disqualifier in the Trump administration. He's got fraud, securities fraud allegations, and a potential indictment that was hanging over his head, and this is the reason that in the recent polling, James Tallarico for the Democrats is anywhere between 2 and 9 points ahead of a potential Paxton candidacy. And that was before Paxton's maybe victory speech tonight. I don't know. But in this, you know, 2026 is not 2024. And I mean that in every possible sense, to a voter base that has a lot of anger and resentment towards the Trump administration and Donald Trump. There's no other way to put it. The polling numbers are beyond abysmal. They're historically abominable. And this is what freaks out the Senate Republicans. And this is one of the reasons they rebelled against Trump with his, we're not setting up a fund to pay people who beat up the police on Jan 6th. They didn't even bother mentioning the potential wipeout of Donald Trump and his family's tax liability with the amendment to the settlement agreement the next day. And, you know, when you've lost the Senate, when you've lost the voters, when you've lost the global community that could have come to your aid, then nothing works. That's why I want to be a wartime president, because my numbers at home are so terrible. That didn't work as a strategy because his numbers abroad are worse, because he has no allies, having spent the entirety of the beginning of his administration bashing our allies and NATO and the European Union. And so when you needed help, it wasn't there for you because you gave terrible, effed up speeches to their face and told them that they needed to adopt your brand of democracy. And then when you were like, without polling anybody, should I go to war in Iran? Then you go to war in Iran, apparently still at war with Iran, to accomplish nothing. I mean, it's not even, I'd be happy if it was the Obama agreement that Trump always bashed because it had Obama's name on it. I'd be happy if we went back to everything that Donald Trump pulled out of when he became president. But it's not going to be that. It's going to be, so much worse if it ever gets announced at all. That's why whenever I do a video, a hot take about Iran, it's similar to what I said about the election night in America. Like, who cares? He's going to announce some settlement at some point when the Iranians let him. And then they'll cue the confetti cannons from Fox News, and some giant flag he'll stand in front of. And then he'll announce something worse than what Obama had, and a lot worse, because now we're going to have to spend and pay or give to the Iranians billions and hundreds of billions of dollars to rebuild the Iranian regime. Yes, that's one of the sticking points. It's not that we're going to, it's how much we're going to spend of U.S. taxpayer dollars to rebuild the Iran that Donald Trump broke. Because now we're under the Powell doctrine, the Colin Powell doctrine. If you break it, you bought it. And we broke, well, we didn't really break Iran. They're stronger today. That's the weird, Donald Trump has a really weird superpower. He makes global leaders stronger following an interaction with him, whether it's Canada's prime minister or the president of Mexico or our enemies, Putin after Alaska, Xi after whatever that 2-day thing, trade mission was, right? And Iran after a 38-day plus war. Stronger. We're going to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. You mean the thing that was open before you started bombing them on the 28th of February? We're not going to let them have a nuclear weapon. They were not that close to getting a nuclear weapon. They were not an imminent threat. And Obama had them under control. We're going to monitor their nuclear stockpile. Right. Sounds like the Obama deal, doesn't it? Absolutely. This just in, we're starting to get questions. Let's see. Tracy H99's question is, and put them in the chat tonight. I got a team. I got Time Life operators standing by for your questions. In your opinion, how likely do you believe the Supreme Court will be held liable for the decisions they've made and have screwed our country? You mean by history? Oh, 1,000%. This will go down as the worst United States Supreme Court, led by the Roberts Court, will go down as an abomination, hopefully an aberration, as the court turns over, but will go down as the worst Supreme Court in history. Look at the rulings: woman's right to choose, criminal liability, immunity for a president, the destruction of the Voting Rights Act. All in a term's work for John Roberts, but they won't be held liable in any other way. That's why the Senate and the Democrats taking the Senate. Let me repeat this, because I know this is a concept. I was having this discussion over lunch today. The Supreme Court, except for our audience, is a very esoteric thing. You know, it's a concept that's not easily grasped, how it impacts your life. But if for no other reason, that if you needed a reason to vote for the Democrats to regain control of this government, the Supreme Court and what it looks like over the next 30 years is up for grabs this November. We repeat, the next 30 years of the Supreme Court are up for grabs this November. Because if Trump wins the Senate, he immediately replaces 80-year-old Alito and 80-year-old Thomas, and he puts in two 40-year-olds, and now there's a 6-3 MAGA right-wing conservative, ultra-conservative majority for the next 30 years. I mean, John Roberts would be the next one off. Okay? So that's why the Supreme Court is so important, and the Senate is so important. Let's see. In Bob 5639. Can you tell me if other Republican governors have suspended their taxes or gas like Indiana's? Not yet. I mean, that's one of the few that's done it. Is that helping the 38-cent excise tax off the $5 and whatever cent a gallon? Let me just, as I came on the air, let me give you this quick stat. This is fascinating. This is by Bloomberg. Since the war, these are all data points since February 28th. The amount of daily ships going through the Strait of Hormuz, which represents 25% of our energy, oil and gas, is down 100 ships a day. Down. And that's not going to be recovered anytime soon. The price of Brent oil futures, which is the benchmark for a barrel of oil, is up 38% since February 28th. U.S. gasoline prices on the spot market are up 49% since February. Yes, that really is pain at the pump. Global stocks, because they're human beings that are banking, trying to play off of Donald Trump, are up 6.1%. The dollar is up 1.2%, and the U.S. 10-year yield on treasuries, in other words, the amount of interest rate you have to pay somebody to invest in the U.S. government, is now up almost 0.7 points, 7 basis points, which means we can't give our money away. Like, people, we have to bribe people and raise the interest rate to almost 5% in order to get them to invest in America. And it's not just because of the war. It's because of the trillions and trillions of dollars of debt. So is it $7 trillion? We pay billions of dollars a day in interest that can't go to a U.S. citizen, can't go for a program, can't go to pay for anything, has to pay for the debt on the bonds of our national debt. And that's not going away anytime soon. And if Donald Trump thought, let me just finish this economic point. If Donald Trump thought that by putting in Kevin Warsh and bashing Jay Powell, who, by the way, is still on the Federal Reserve, that putting in Kevin Warsh was going to lead to lower interest rates, it's done. It's not happening, because that Treasury rate I just told you about scared the crap out of the Fed. And now 2 of Donald Trump's Republicans on the Fed have said they're not going to vote to lower rates. And you need 7 votes to lower rates. And right now, Donald Trump has 1, because the economy sucks. There's no other way to put it. Let me just answer this last question. Poker Rossi, I like that, says, what are Democrats going to do to Donald Trump when they win the House and maybe the Senate? We all know Donald Trump doesn't care about the law, so what can they do? All right. Well, I think Democrats have to demonstrate, as they close this deal with the American people, they make the closed in order to get elected. They have to make, I think, 2 major aspects of their platform with the American people, the contract with America, if you will. And that they can walk and chew gum at the same time, that they can bring accountability back in government and root out corruption. It starts with impeachment. Yes, even the Wall Street Journal, Rupert Murdoch, said over the weekend, Donald Trump is destined to be impeached a 3rd time. Impeachment, and it's not just to say we impeached him. It's because the eyes of history and the rest of the world are looking upon us. And we have to signal to the next Trump. You think this guy's bad? I'm speaking to the next one. And we have to signal to him that we have the tools in our tool bag, that when the other party gets back into power, they know what to do with it. So impeachment proceedings, I mean, it'll be dozens of articles of impeachment. They'll have to edit themselves to get it down to the top 12. And then a conviction in the Senate. And even if we only take the Senate by a couple of seats, I don't know. We've seen a number of things that look awfully bipartisan lately, with a couple of Republicans, especially on the back end, the back 9 of Donald Trump's career, in the presidency. Once we get past November and he loses and he starts into the back 9, so to speak, he gets weaker and weaker and weaker each day. And maybe Republicans are like, well, F Trump. I don't care. The guy's he's a mad king. So that, and then laws that get passed to help people around the kitchen table, affordability, rent and healthcare premiums, and get people back on Obamacare, the tens of millions that have been tossed off because of Donald Trump and MAGA, and get gas prices down 50%, if not more, and get food prices down. That has to be the pact that the Democrats make with America. And I agree with Sandra St. John, or Sandra, yeah, Sandra St. John, in a question, what do we do about the Supreme Court? Everything's on the table, including adding, I don't know, 4 more seats? Pardon me. And having, but that only works, by the way, if it's a 1-2 punch. The Democrats have to win at the midterm. They've got to win in 2028, because if they start looking to, or just wait till 2028 and see who wins the presidency, because you don't want to expand the Supreme Court while Trump's in office, and you don't want to have the law in the books in case a Republican somehow pulls it out. I don't want Marco Rubio picking 4 new ones. So they're going to have to be a little gamesmanship here, if you know what I mean. Okay, so we're going to do a couple of things here. When I come back, I'm going to talk about South Carolina, something they did today concerning civil rights icon Jim Clyburn. And I want to come back and talk about a number of things related to Epstein. Melania Wolf and, I got them married again. Melania Trump and Michael Wolf's lawsuit. And what do I think is going to happen there next? Programming note, Michael Wolf's going to join, I think, Court of History on Legal AF on Friday. We'll be asking him some hard questions because, there's some issues there with Michael, as we know. And we want to talk about why Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, not only listed on his original filing that his occupation was chairman and his employer currently was Cantor Fitzgerald, his family office, now run by his sons, instead of listing Commerce Secretary. But why a month before he testified, there it is, and he amended it. Somebody woke up and said, wait a minute, shouldn't we list that as Commerce Secretary? But he donated $5 million to the super PAC controlled by the House Republicans and Mike Johnson while he was negotiating to testify about his relationship with Epstein. Buying softballs, perhaps? Why do I have to do, I have to, but why do I have to do analysis and commentary about a member of the cabinet paying off the Republican Party before he gives his testimony? And why isn't there any belief in the Trump cabinet that that's a bad thing to do and is a wrong thing to do, both optically and actually? Why do they feel they're able to do that without repercussion? That's where the vote comes in at the midterms. I'm going to cover that. Southern Poverty Law Center. What a fine organization. I've been following them since I was a kid, and supporting them. Some disgusting allegations against them by the Trump administration we'll explore. They got indicted by Todd Blanche. Speaking of going down in history, the worst attorney general of the most corrupt Department of Justice. I thought that title was going to be held for a longer period of time by Pam Bondi. Nope. Because Todd Blanche is bringing indictments that even she wouldn't bring. The seashell indictment against James Comey, former FBI director. Oh, look at those seashells on the beach. It must be a death threat to the president. Even Pam Bondi, according to reporting, even she turned down that indictment. Nope, not Todd Blanche. Nope. Indict the Southern Poverty Law Center, the #1 organization for taking down hate groups in America, tracking 4,000 of them, suing some of them like the KKK out of existence. Oh no, they're a hate group. Oh no, they're funding. And one of the most disgusting allegations against them, they funded, which is a lie, they funded Charlottesville, Virginia, and Unite the Right. Yeah, okay. They just filed a motion for vindictive prosecution. I want to talk about that. Kilmer Abrego Garcia winning on that very same doctrine. And something good that happened with Alabama maps today. And of course, we're going to have Dani Bensky, one of the leaders of the Epstein Survivor movement and survivor movement in general, come and brief our audience and talk to our audience here on The Intersection, including about her visit to the Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey Epstein Memorial Library. I think hopefully I have your attention now. But before we get to all of that, we're going to take a quick break. So many ways to support what we do on The Intersection. You helped us win the Webby for the Best New Podcast People's Voice Award. There's the symbol. Where's the symbol? There it is. Get to wear the Webby badge. Thank you for that. This podcast is also, of course, on audio platforms. Pick us up on Spotify and Apple, 5-star reviews and comments. That keeps us at the top of the charts for news. And also the YouTube version puts us at the top of the charts for YouTube because they also rank and rate. And all this is important, not because of the ego. If anybody knows me, I have no issues with my ego. The problem is it gives us like the street credibility we need to bring on the contributors, the commentators, the guests, the newsmakers that you want to hear from. People pick up our phone call now, whereas maybe a year or 3 years ago they didn't. So that's all because of our audience and because people appreciate the growth of our audience. And certainly I do here on The Intersection. Follow my work over on the Legal AF YouTube channel, which I curate. We have 12 fresh videos every day. I usually do the first 4 or so. And amazing contributors you're not going to find anywhere else. We collaborate with the American Civil Liberties Union. We're working on a collaboration with the NAACP and Democracy Forward. And then we bring them all to you in the form of videos or interviews. And then we've got Legal AF has a Substack where I do a live report, usually around 12:30 p.m. Eastern time every day. And I have a chat with our people that join us there. So that's really fun, along with a dozen other pieces of content on Legal AF Substack. And so if you want to support us, that's the way to support us. You become a member, you become a subscriber, card-carrying member of the Legal AF community, all in support of what we do here. And of course, I appreciate each and every one of you coming here on The Intersection. So let's take a quick break. And when we get back, we'll talk about all things Epstein. Starting something new can be exciting, but also terrifying. When I first started this podcast and YouTube channel, I kept thinking, what if nobody listens or watches? What if this doesn't work out? Those doubts are real. But taking that leap ended up being one of the best decisions I ever made. And it helps when you have a partner like Shopify on your side to help. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. Shopify is also packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Plus, Shopify helps you find your customers with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you ever get stuck, Shopify's award-winning 24/7 customer support is always around to share advice. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/intersection. Go to shopify.com/intersection. That's shopify.com/intersection. You've got weight loss goals, but hitting them is another story. Enter Weight Loss by Hims. It's designed to support you in losing the weight and keeping it off, and Hims now offers access to an affordable range of FDA-approved GLP-1 medications, including the Wegovy pill and the Wegovy pen. With Wegovy at Hims, lose up to 20% or more of your body weight when combined with diet and exercise. It helps you regulate your appetite and eat less, so success is within reach. Plus, Wegovy is the first ever GLP-1 pill for weight loss, so there are no needles needed. Through Hims, everything happens online. You'll connect with a licensed provider who will determine if treatment is right for you. If prescribed, your medication is delivered right to your door. No insurance necessary, and it doesn't stop there. Hims makes hitting your goals seamless by offering access to 24/7 messaging with your care team and an in-app lifestyle and nutrition support, like recipes, meal plans, fitness videos, sleep content, and more. Ready to reach your goals? Visit hims.com/truth to get a personalized, affordable plan that gets you. That's HIMS.com/truth, hims.com/truth. Weight Loss by Hims is not available in all 50 states. Wegovy is the registered trademark of Novo Nordisk AS. To get started and learn more, including important safety information, Wegovy clinical study information, and restrictions, visit hims.com. Some of those ads are tough, especially the disclaimers. And we are back on The Intersection. Thank you to our sponsors who help keep the gas in the tank and keep shows like The Intersection on the air. I am so thrilled to have our next guest join us to brief our audience and for our audience to know more about her and her authentic story. She's a leader of the Survivor movement. She's a leader of the Epstein Survivor movement. And one of the reasons that the Epstein Transparency Act was passed at all. It's the pressure campaigns led by people like Dani Bensky that made it happen. And I have been following, of course, her career and those that have stepped out to against much personal sacrifice with a lot of courage to be both a victim, survivor, and have to demand justice in public for the thing that happened to you, which happens to be sexual abuse. That's a special category of individual. And so of course I've been following Dani and her career as an advocate in the arts and in education. But also I was moved, as I'm sure many of you were, by Katie Fang doing a segment with Dani at the Donald J. Trump and Jeffrey Epstein Memorial Library, hopefully a traveling exhibit, which puts into one room all of the volumes of, not all the files, but the ones that have been actually produced. And we'll talk more about that and show you a clip of that after we bring in Dani. Let's bring in Dani.
Hi, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you so much.
Oh, it pales by comparison, but to the actual person. Hi, Dani.
Hi.
All right. So absolutely. Why don't you tell, for those that don't know who you are on, I can't believe there are any people, but for those in the Midas Touch world and intersection world who don't know your story, rather than me tell it, I think it's always more powerful if it's coming from you, if you're comfortable with it. Talk about your, I know, we know the basics, right? 2004, 2005, you were a ballerina and then somehow got into the Epstein world. And then we can move forward because we're 20 years after that. And it's hard to believe, right? And now as a leader of that movement, talk about that and your decision, which I know had to be very, very difficult, especially given the crimes against you, to step out into the public and be a leader and an advocate in this area.
Yeah, I mean, stepping forward is totally attributed to those survivors that came before me. I think back to I came forward and actually was never meaning to come to be public. I didn't want to be public. And I actually went to a pretrial hearing for Ghislaine Maxwell to thank Sigrid McCauley because I had only ever seen her via Zoom. She's my lawyer, right? And so we had only talked via Zoom. She was the first person to ever give me a really safe space where I could tell my story in full. And so I just felt like I really wanted to give her a hug, and it was during the pandemic. So I went to this hearing and we had this amazing conversation about, I talked a lot to her about Maria Farmer first, because I remember watching, one of the Epstein documentaries that she was in and just feeling like, oh my gosh, they held her art hostage the same way that they did for me with ballet, or that Jeffrey did for me with ballet. And really feeling like the disassociation was so real, and she was able to discuss it in such an eloquent manner. And she kind of changed my idea of what a survivor was. And then, I saw Virginia speak, and Virginia Giuffre just had this way of speaking that she was so bright and so authentic, but you also could feel her pain. And I remember feeling so connected to her. And so both of those women were people that I didn't want to claim the word victim for a really long time, if ever. Part of me was like so locked into the shame of being there, and telling myself I put myself there. Jeffrey had said after I turned 18 that I would be brought up on prostitution charges, which really made me very fearful when I was subpoenaed in 2008 and then brought in to the FBI. So I just always had this sort of really obviously like negative, shameful connotation sort of in the back of my head. So having that talk with Sigrid that day, we were standing by the elevator and just talking about these very brave women, Virginia and Maria. And then we talked about Annie Farmer and how eloquent and she just educates every time she speaks. And I was just saying like, gosh, I wish I could be like them one day. They're so amazing, and I walked out the front door of the courthouse and media was there, and I was masked because we were still coming off of the pandemic, and people were screaming Virginia's name. And I think it was just, I was blonde and masked. And so everybody's screaming Virginia, Virginia. And Sigrid had said, nope, not Virginia. This is, another survivor. And then they said, like, can she speak? And she said, you don't have to. And I felt really compelled to go up to the mic. And I said it, which was such a crazy thing for me because I was the quiet dancer in the back of the room. Like, I moved for a reason. I didn't want to speak. I never felt like I had a voice. But I did come forward that day and made a comment, but didn't say my name. And then I was leaving. Reporters are tripping and asking me, what's your name? What year? How old were you? All these things. And I remember just feeling this, like, it was like this push on the back. It was like all of a sudden I knew that there was community, and I had never known that there was really one before. And so I just said my name, and then nothing happened for a while until really this September. And meeting the survivor sister community has been, it is life-changing. And you just feel like you can run the race when you're in it together.
Absolutely. And, I had a couple of questions for you to the extent that you're comfortable in answering them. From my own perspective, when I saw Melania come out with that angry, crooked finger, and her first thing was, besides denying the obvious, which is her connectivity to Epstein through Ghislaine Maxwell and Trump, but then trying to do some sort of half-baked victim support section of her speech, in which she said effectively that victims and survivors need to go in the public record in order to get justice and dignity for themselves. In what world do sex abuse survivors have to testify in public in order to get justice? How did you feel about that?
We're just always asked to do more. And it's always, we have said from the beginning, time and time again, that we're not political. And yet somehow we get thrust into this political pawn situation where we're always being used like a game of chess. And so, yes, on one end, she came out looking like she's so supportive. But meanwhile, all of us were like, what is she trying to get ahead of, right? There's got to be something that she's like trying to get on top of. And it was just, it's a ridiculous notion. We have a legal system for a reason. Like, we have a Department of Justice, right? And that's, I guess, what survivors we keep coming back to is like, why are we always asked to go and like just tell our stories? Like, to be fair, none of this has been about us telling our stories to feel better or feel good. It's about inciting change and changing it for the next generation and for our kids, and making sure that the world gets safer and that demand ends, So for us just to like get into a room with Congress and just start telling our stories, like, it really does absolutely nothing for us. And so part of me is always like, why do we have a legal system if we're not going to use it?
Well, and to that point, let's just say, and if I get the numbers wrong, please correct me, 1,200 victims?
I think we're up to 1,400 now.
All right. Okay. So 1,400, you have 1,400 victims. I don't know. Let's do the math. 600 plus, 700 plus predators, because I'm sure they overlapped. And why is there not one conviction or indictment of 700 men primarily and enablers?
Even there's no investigation even starting. Like, that blows my mind. It's not even like, we're not even to the point, forget indictment, we're so far away from anybody being indicted. We haven't even started the process on any single perpetrator when there are 600 or 700 of them.
Could you imagine if any other Department of Justice or FBI said, sure, we've got 3 million pages of documents and we've got names and probably 600 people in there, but we're waiting for the victims to give congressional testimony before we do anything?
It's crazy.
What? Okay. So, and then, I don't know if you had a reaction to the Victim Compensation Fund for Jan 6th insurrectionists who abused police. I'm listening to that and I'm thinking, where is the Victim Compensation Fund for the FBI, the Department of Justice, letting the Epstein victims and survivors down the way they did with the women's Olympic gymnastics team? That led to a judgment fund payment of about 140 million to the Olympic team. Where is the fund? And why is our, sex abuser in chief, not, of course, and Melania not supporting an actual tangible a fund for dignity for the Epstein survivors.
I mean, they're not even acknowledging that it happened, right? Like you saw it with Bondi, the last hearing that we were all at, and she couldn't even turn around when, they asked us to stand and raise our hand if the DOJ had contacted us. They asked us to stand, Pam, Bondi, will you turn around and acknowledge these survivors? Like that is baseline humanity. That is empathy. That is compassion. And she couldn't even do that. And then we had Todd Blanche get out there and say there was no mishandling. And it's like, I think anybody from here to Mars, like aliens, could come in and tell you that this was mishandled. Like literally, there were naked photos of underage girls that were released from our Department of Justice. My information was out there everywhere. I mean, it was like where I worked, my phone number. I mean, you name it, it's all there. Not to mention like very personal, detailed accounts of what happened in my life that were abusive. I mean, it's horrific. And so, for him then to say, oh, there was no mishandling of the files. It's like, okay, but January 6th insurrectionists are going to get funding and you can't even turn around and say, we're sorry. I'm sorry.
Did you watch the Blanche last week cross-examination in the Senate?
Yeah.
And one of the senators just started the question with an innocuous beginning. He said, let's talk about the Epstein investigation. And he said, I'm sorry, I don't know this vocabulary that you're using. What is the Epstein investigation? Yeah, that's the point, Todd. There is no Epstein investigation. Let me show you. I want to show our audience and with your indulgence, show the clip or a clip from you visiting. I think it was in Tribeca. Has that exhibit closed?
It's closed for now, but I believe it might be moving. So there's some new fun things on the horizon. I don't know if that's official yet. Maybe I shouldn't be talking about it, but
no, you should talk about it.
I don't know. But I think the hope is to take it around the nation.
I was one of the things when I saw the video, and I did a video off the video with Katie. Katie's a close friend of mine. I said, without knowing anything, I said, this needs to be a traveling exhibit coming to a town, likely a Democratic blue town near you. Yeah. But without further ado, let's play the clip of Katie Fang and Dani.
Thank you. Oh my God, wow. 3,437 volumes. It's walls.
I mean, just look at the sheer volume. The fact that people are still saying that there's nothing to investigate when this is like what you're looking at. It's just insane. This is like tangible. This is real. To see the person that scheduled me who is still not behind bars, her name is here. When you look at it like this, it's like, I just don't understand how we haven't seen more action. I just felt like survivor safety should have been paramount from the very beginning, and it's always like we're being called all these horrible names, and it's like the hoax, the nothing is real, nothing to see here.
I just pulled for you volume 2,632, Dani, of 3,437.
Yes. Oh my God.
And counting.
We know that there are documents out there that are still not found. And so when you look at how much there is, and yet we're still looking for things, how do you turn the page on all of this? There is credible evidence that needs to be looked at and investigated.
Yeah, I was also looking down at our chat, and I think you'll appreciate this sentiment. Demon Deacon 21 said, Blanche will lose his law license. He'll be selling donuts, peanuts, and loose cigarettes and packs with John Eastman. Just wait. Probably, likely. So to cut to the chase, your name got exposed.
Yeah.
Details of the crimes against you got exposed when they weren't. I mean, I read all of the filings that the Department of Justice said, we're working overtime to redact and make sure, and then and everyone, it was an oops. There was a human being on the other side of it, like you, re-traumatized by a callous, uncaring Department of Justice. And just to do the checklist, since Trump's been in office and the files have come out, the White House has never arranged to speak to the survivors, right?
No, and Blanche won't speak to us, and he lied. He said in his testimony last week that he had spoken to survivors, and so we were like all sitting there, we're like, write a letter, like get so angry.
He did right, because they'll say anything when
True.
when pressured, even if it's untrue, even if it breaks everybody's heart. Tell our audience, Dani, what you're doing now, because I went on your website, and we'll put a link later below. Talk about what you're doing with your life since that moment you came out from behind the mask with great courage.
I mean, this year completely changed my life in ways that I never could foresee. I was a dance educator, and I have basically put everything on hold just to do advocacy with the team, what I like to call the team now, Virginia's Family and the Farmers, and there are a couple of others that are really doing a ton of advocacy. And we are trying to currently change the statute of limitations. It's a law called Virginia's Law, rightly named. And, there shouldn't be a time limit on justice. And that is the beginning step. That is like, the tiniest thing that we could do. But yeah, I think we're lobbying for new laws. There's a loophole right now that, it's ridiculous. It was you can buy sex from a young girl ages 15 to 17 years old in New York right now, and it's a misdemeanor. So like you basically would get a slap on the wrist, the same as if you stole a pack of Twizzlers. So for buying a human, so there are a lot of laws that feel really antiquated that need help. And so we're trying to kind of clean up the mess a little bit. And I always picture it like cleaning the house. That's like my favorite analogy, because you start to clean one spot and then you like move all the papers and you're like, oh gosh, I have to dust. So it's like, oh gosh, I have to Lysol, right? And it's like, it goes deeper and deeper and deeper, because you start to see the way our systems have been structured and how problematic they are. And so hopefully we can all work together to really make some real change. But I think it really helps to have a community behind us. I think, something we saw with the Transparency Act was the call to action. And we got things from survivors everywhere. My inbox was flooded with survivors that were just stepping forward and saying, we called our reps. So I do think, it is a worldwide effort, and it does feel like a movement, and it keeps us going.
Talk about antiquated laws, just to give another example. I practice law, including in New York.
Yeah.
The problem that E. Jean Carroll had,
yeah,
and I know her lawyer well, Robbie Kaplan, both Robbie and E. Jean have been on the show before, is that in the era when she was sexually assaulted and I mean, we'll use the R word, by Donald Trump in that dressing room, the laws on the books at the time said that unless the victim could identify that a penis had been placed inside her, or there was forensic evidence, if it was anything else, that she was, that would not be a rape, that would be sexual abuse. That's the reason, and the only reason, that the jury concluded that they had to find sexual abuse. And Donald Trump loves running around and saying, see, I'm not a rapist, I'm a sexual abuser, as if that's any better. Right. He actually sued over that. And that's why George Stephanopoulos and ABC bent the knee and stroked the check for $15 million, because he said R word instead of sexual abuser. But that's the only reason. Now that law's been changed.
Yeah.
Back to your point. So it's so great that that's one of the things that you're doing. And you talk about public support. And we always like to have a kind of a call to action for our audience, because they're not just watching, they want to help. And for your organization and for things that you do, if people want to be involved, how would they go about doing that?
Calling the DOJ and keeping pressure on the DOJ is really important right now. The fact that we are seeing funding for insurrectionists is absolutely ridiculous, when survivors are now giving up their lives to be able to do this work. We are full-time advocates a lot of the time at this point. And, we know that everything was so mishandled at the DOJ. So calling and keeping pressure on, and just making sure that when you call, you're asking for specific things. Like, we want to see Bondi testify under oath, right? That is something we keep seeing, these hearings that are sort of these more elusive. We're not really under oath, we're transcribed, but it's loose, and that's not going to fly. Like, we survivors are so tired of these sort of closed door discussions. And so when you call the DOJ asking for really specific things, like making sure that Pam Bondi testifies under oath, making sure that it's videotaped, making sure that it is transcribed, and making sure that it is released publicly, so that we keep the pressure on. It's really helpful.
Yeah. Well, if you have another minute, why don't you stay on and we'll talk a little bit about your reaction to the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, uh, stroking a check for $5 million to the House Republican super PAC while he was negotiating to testify to the House Oversight Committee about his relationship with his next door neighbor, Jeffrey Epstein. What was your reaction to finding out that he thought it was okay to write a $5 million check to the group that was going to interview him?
I mean, truly, you can't write this stuff, right? Like, this is stuff that, like, I can't make it up. I talked to all the other survivors and we're like, who is writing this? This is a bad SNL sketch. Like, even SNL would be like, throw that out. That can't really happen. That's totally illegal, right? I wish I knew how that was even possible and how it's legal. He lived right next door. If you were on that block, you saw girls coming and going all the time. And I think to myself a lot about Maria Farmer's abuse in 1996. And then the fact that I was there in 2004, my abuse could have been stopped so many times and so many girls could have been spared. And so, living next door, I have an especially hard time with just the perjury all over the place from everybody. Like, everything's in the files. You can find it in the files and nobody's investigating any of it. And it makes America look so foolish.
That's a very good observation about the comings and goings of your next door neighbor. There was even reporting that Epstein, who has no children, was inquiring about hiring the services of one of Lutnick's nannies. Why does your neighbor, who doesn't have children, need a nanny?
Nanny, yeah.
And why don't you think that is weird? And plus, we already know from Lutnick's own podcasting on the Miranda Devine podcast that he met him in 2005 and was completely disgusted by his next door neighbor. So for what? This is in and around the time that you're being abused by Epstein. Yeah. Right. And so maybe if Trump, who thought he was a creep, had gone to the police earlier, or as you said, Lutnick had, or Maria Farmer's report had been taken seriously. I actually, without putting the two and two together about you, yeah, I said a version of how many human beings were abused between Maria Farmer and him being sent away for a short period of time for child prostitution charges.
Which he was still raping girls while he had an ankle monitor on, while under house arrest. I mean, this is the first time, in September when I started to meet everybody, I went to the House Oversight Committee, which was hilarious in its own right because, my lawyer was like, oh, we're going to meet with a couple of reps. And then we walk in and it's literally the entire House Oversight Committee. And it's like, oh, I'm telling my story for the first time in front of people and it's all of Congress. It's like, okay, I guess this is just what we're doing. But it was the first time that I really understood that I was just a piece of the puzzle and got out of my own silo and started to see how big this was. And we actually spoke sequentially. And so Annie was there and Annie started speaking about Maria Farmer's story first. And that was when I started to put the pieces together. But I wasn't the last person that spoke. I was right in the middle of all of this. And so when you start thinking about the Alexander Acosta, the Acosta plea deal in 2008, like I had just been subpoenaed. I had just been basically interrogated by the FBI, but people like Les Wexner were never questioned. People like Leslie Groff, who knows everything, who's the assistant, right? Like those are people that literally were never, ever questioned. And victims are being brought in like we're perpetrators, so it just, none of it makes any sense. And then moving through to 2009, we literally heard a story from a Jane Doe who was abused and raped with Jeffrey had an ankle monitor on. He set up this foundation, the Florida Science Foundation, and there was a police officer there and he was raping girls. So it's just, how is this humanly possible? And there have never been any answers.
Yeah, Dani Bensky, I'm so glad that we met and we got together for today on The Intersection. And as things develop with the advocacy that you're doing, I'd love to have you back on Legal AF YouTube and or The Intersection. I can just tell from the questions that are sort of flying by here that I got one eye on, and comments about your courage, your strength, your authenticity. People want to help. They want to be part of a supportive community for you, and they appreciate the strength that you've demonstrated along with the others. I have never walked in your shoes, but I can only imagine what you had to overcome in order to be standing here in front of other human beings telling your story. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much. And
Yeah.
I just hope that there's a message that's being sent to survivors that you're always safe and that you should be coming forward if you're ready to. And if not, that's okay too. But there is community, and finding strength in community is everything.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here, Dani Bensky. We'll put links to your website and all of that in the notes for people that want to be involved or keep in contact with you that way. Thanks for being on. I look forward to meeting with you again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dani Bensky, survivor and leader of the movement against all those that abused in the name of Jeffrey Epstein, including at the highest level in government. I'm glad you're here on The Intersection. A couple of updates to stories as predicted. Donald Trump's health is A-OK. I'm sure he wrote that himself based on his Walter Reed visit earlier today. We already know from 2 doctors ago that he wrote his own medical health report that was announced to the public. That came out. So is anybody surprised that Sean Barabella, the Captain Dr. Sean, has said he's look at the guy. He's morbidly obese. He can barely swing a club. His hands are covered in makeup. He's got cankles. He can't walk straight. He can't hear. We're seeing him repeat himself and or sleep on the job. If he was your employee, you'd fire him. Not because of age, just because of performance. And then, of course, also no surprise, I'm getting reports from the chat, probably true, that Paxton has pulled it out. He's beaten Cornyn, and Donald Trump will crow about it, cue the confetti cannon on Fox. Oh, my God, this is so great. It's not great for the Republicans. It's terrible. And Cornyn is now, if Donald Trump thought Tom Tillis of North Carolina was going to be a thorn in his side from now until January of 2028, wait till you see Cornyn and Cassidy and Thomas Massey, who said he's going to run as an independent, because now they got nothing to lose. And it's not just until November, it's until January that they're going to oppose everything that Donald Trump wants to do and slide over with the Democrats in the Senate. Yeah, the Democrats are down 5 votes in the Senate, but you pick up Cassidy and you pick up Tillis and you pick up Cornyn, and you're getting awful darn close, and you start putting pressure on Susan, what's her name up in Maine, Susan Collins, and you get Murkowski in Alaska, who's worried about her seat, and suddenly you got the Senate. Good job. Good job. So go right, go hard right, Republicans, because all you got to do as a Democrat is be competent, be in favor of good government and public service, accountability and affordability, and step to the left and step to the center. You should be able to win. And I think if the sound that you're hearing is champagne corks popping in the headquarters of James Tallarico for Senate, because he's got a real chance now of taking the Senate. I mean, he had one before, but he's got, besides the money flowing into Texas in his behalf, this isn't like, we talked about it on Saturday with Ben. This isn't like Beto O'Rourke, who I liked, but this is like a real deal. This is like Texas payback. There's a group that don't like Abbott and don't like Paxton and are going to come out at the midterms in a way they wouldn't necessarily at the general election. And so we have that to talk about. Let me do one quickie. Melania and Jeffrey Wolf. Michael Wolf. I don't know where my names are tonight. Listen, I know Michael's got a mixed reputation on our channel because it also came out in the Epstein files that he was like coaching Epstein in his PR as his biographer. I get you. But he also got threatened with a defamation case about things he said or opinions he had about Melania. And he said they're all true, or they're opinions that can't form the basis of defamation. A New York federal judge appointed by Donald Trump, Mary Kay, Vocasil or Voxil, she didn't dismiss his case on the merits. She said the case should stay in New York federal court, even though he argued that she's a New York resident and lives in Trump Tower and not with Donald Trump in Mar-a-Lago. She wouldn't grant discovery related to that to find out where she really lives, and instead said, no, I'm going to keep the case here, but I'm not going to give you what you want. You're going to have to wait to get sued in Florida by Melania. Now, Michael's going to be on Friday with the Court of History guys on Legal AF. I know one of the questions is going to be, Michael, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals in New York and try to get them to order Judge Vocasil, or I always mispronounce her name, to give you the jurisdictional discovery and Melania's deposition about where she really lives? Or are you just going to say, screw it, and file in Florida, in Miami, before Melania files against you to try to get Judge Cannon, oh, what a tangled web we weave, up in Fort Pierce? So it's like a race to see who's going to win. And I want to, maybe Michael will be in a position to give us more information on that. Speaking of lawsuits, Southern Poverty Law Center, one of the greatest organizations, right up there with the American Civil Liberties Union and the NAACP. Southern Poverty Law Center has been, since 1971, exposing hate groups in America, extremist groups, white supremacists, white nationalists. They've cataloged more than 4,000 of them as of 2024. They have litigated some out of existence, including aspects of the KKK. And they have used undercover agents, I mean, we've seen it, to obtain information in return for money. That's where some of your donor dollars go, and then turn that information over to the FBI. That was a working mechanism for years, until Donald Trump decided that everybody that wasn't with him was against him, that everybody on the left or the center was an enemy, that everybody was Antifa or left-wing radicals, especially in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder. And he put the crosshairs on Southern Poverty Law Center, claiming that they were involved with the they funded the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally that led to the death of that poor paralegal who was crushed underneath a car. Are you kidding me? Has anybody, and if you haven't, go on now. They're still out there criticizing, rightly so, the Trump administration. Go look at their hate map, which is a map of America about where all the hate groups are. Go read their annual report about hate groups, the year in hate, and you'll know everything you need to know about the organization. So they get indicted for fraud on their donors because some of the money was used to confidential informants in order to get themselves inside the organizations in order to bring them down. That's a problem. So in the motion, which I knew that once Kilmer Abrego Garcia earlier in the week finally, after 7 months, won his motion for vindictive prosecution after this poor guy was sent to the torture prison of El Salvador, threatened to be sent 3,000 miles away to Liberia, all because he got caught in the crosshairs of Donald Trump's migrant removal program and sent to El Salvador without due process. Supreme Court voted 9-0 to bring him home. And then the only way they brought him home is they indicted him in Tennessee for a traffic stop and said he was human smuggling with no evidence whatsoever. That indictment got dismissed on a vindictive prosecution grounds. It's the first one against the Trump administration. And I said at the time, there'll be dozens more. Right on cue, Southern Poverty Law Center, first motion to dismiss for vindictive prosecution. At the same time, this is the weave we talked about at the top, for the James Comey, who got indicted for the seashells. He's asked for more time for his trial so he can file his own motions, which of course are going to be motion to dismiss for vindictive prosecution. And let me play you some of the clips that are actually referenced, or the type of clips that are referenced in the motion by the Southern Poverty Law Center, including Donald Trump, Todd Blanche, and Kash Patel. Let's play, if we can put it in this order, let's play Trump first. Play the clip.
Southern law is financing the KKK and lots of other radical terrible groups. And then they go out and they say, oh, we've got to stop the KKK, and yet they give them hundreds of thousands and even millions of dollars. It's a total scam run by the Democrats. It shows you that, like Charlottesville was all funded by the Southern Law. That was a Southern Law deal too. And it was done to make me look bad, and it turned out to be a total fake. It basically was a rigged election. I hope one of your 60-minute episodes, which really hasn't changed very much from the last few years, I'm surprised, but one of those episodes should be on Southern Law and the fact that they spent millions and millions of dollars on absolute far right and just bad groups. And then they'd use those groups and they'd say, these are Republican groups and we're coming to your rescue. And they're the ones that have funded it, and they're the ones that keep them going.
He can't even get the name of the entity right. It's the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC. He keeps calling it Southern Law, right? And then, of course, he goes after Norah O'Donnell. Says, I'm surprised the 60 Minutes hasn't gotten better since my buddies bought the entire network. I mean, that's what he's really implying. And then Kash Patel, remember, the FBI before this administration, including when James Comey was the head of the FBI, would work closely with the Southern Poverty Law Center and like groups like the AD, the Anti-Defamation League, to get data and tips in order to pursue, to go after extremist groups. And they are apolitical, not democratic organizations. The SPLC doesn't care what the organization's roots are. They just care that they're a hate group or an extremist group or a paramilitary group. You know, all the groups that Donald Trump is trying to fund in time for the midterms with his $1776 billion, victim fund. He's funding them, right? Not the Southern Poverty Law Center. What, the $20 they gave the guy to give him a tip? That's funding Charlottesville? Here's Kash Patel going after the Southern Poverty Law Center to score cheap political points.
I just want to say that again. They used the fraudulently raised money by lying to their donor network, thousands of Americans, to go ahead and actually pay the leadership of these supposed violent extremist groups. The groups, as the general laid out, include the Ku Klux Klan, the United Klans of America, Unite to Right, National Alliance, the National Socialist Movement, the Aryan Nation Motorcycle Club, and the National Socialist Party of America, and also the American Front. In at least one of these matters, our investigation revealed that funds were used to facilitate the commission of further state and federal offenses, totaling over $3 million.
I want to make sure I understand. You're alleging that the Southern Poverty Law Center was paying the leaders of KKK and other groups to continue their operations? Is that?
I'm not alleging it. The grand jury returned an indictment that says that. And so what the investigation found, according to the indictment that was returned today, is that they were paying. So the Southern Poverty Law Center is raising money, asking folks to give them money to dismantle racism. And over a very long period of time, they were using some of the money they raised from donors to pay to, they call them field, basically to informants, for information, for access, to just pay them for certain, to do certain things. And so, yes, that's exactly what the indictment charged.
So by that extension, by that logic, the FBI and the CIA, which often runs fake businesses, putting real money in the hands of bad people until they're ready to arrest and indict them, they are also supporting murder and arson and terrorism, because until they get enough evidence to stop the bad guys, they're being funded by the government, right? So the government should be indicted under Todd Blanche's idea. Look, I don't think anybody is shocked that some of the money that the SPLC had been using came from donors to pay informants. I mean, what does Todd Blanche think that the SPLC was going to do? Go up there with a vest that said SPLC and knock on the front door of the KKK or the Proud Boys or the Oath Keepers or any of the other white supremacist or white nationalist groups or any other group that's an extremist group and say, hi, everybody, we're just taking a poll for the SPLC. Are you a terrorist organization? Are you effing kidding me? How stupid, this is rhetorical, how stupid do they think the American people are? That's what we're going to believe. This is, if you look at the sequence, and it's up on Legal AF Substack, if you look at the sequence in the Southern Poverty Law Center's motion, in which they say to the judge, look, we have presumption of vindictive prosecution here. Look at the statements at the highest level by the government. Look at the executive orders issued by Trump after Charlie Kirk's murder. He was itching for an excuse to go after anything he thought was left-wing. No, the SPLC doesn't just go against right-wing extremists. They go against Antifa or left-wing or progressive terrorist groups too. Read the book. Read the hate map. Read the Year in Hate. Comes out every year since 1971. You know, this would be the equivalent of them. I don't want this to happen, but this would be the equivalent of them indicting the ACLU. You know, or Act Blue, which is always being mentioned, or Common Cause, or Midas Touch, or The Intersection. You know, let's call it for what it is. So I read it. You can read it for yourself. I think it makes a powerful argument, and it also recites what just happened with the Abrego Garcia case. And it's arguing that at the very least, the burden should be shifted to the government to prove that they are not vindictively prosecuting the SPLC for expressing its First Amendment rights to track hate groups of all things, and put that. And if that burden shifts and puts the government in the position of proving that they didn't do it the way that it happened with the Abrego Garcia case, I think SPLC is one step closer to getting out from under this particular indictment. And I think James Comey is watching this closely, as is Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, and anybody else, you know, John Brennan, the former CIA director, Adam Schiff, the senator from California, and anybody else that's on the hit list by Kash Patel, Todd Blanche, and Donald Trump. Finally, you know, we're on election night in America. We had three rulings all came out today. One was great, and two were not great, but expected. The not great ones is Tennessee. A federal judge in Tennessee and a federal judge in Florida approved the new rigged maps for those particular states. It'll end up going to the United States Supreme Court through their respective appellate courts, but that came out. But Alabama, roll tide. You know, they're just maps that are too racist even for the Alabama federal judges, two of which are Trumpers. And this three-judge panel, which has looked at these maps upside down and sideways for the last 3 years and have issued a series of orders, each one on a record saying the obvious, that the legislature in Alabama are racist, and they made a racist decision, intentionally racist, to eliminate a black seat in Alabama, which had nothing to do with trying to make another Republican district. See, the Supreme Court's like, well, if it's red and blue, that's okay, even if it eliminates a black person. Like, no, that's not okay. And so the three-judge panel, the Supreme Court sent it back to this three-judge panel, 2 Trumpers and 1 Clinton appointee, and said, well, now that we've ruled in the Calais decision from last month that unless there's intentional racism, you have to allow a map, even if it eliminates all the black people, as long as they have an argument that it's done for partisan party reasons and not for racial reasons. So the only pin left standing after the Voting Rights Act was gutted was the finding of intentional racism. Well, this three-judge panel found intentional racism on a enormous record, they called it. In fact, let me just read to you, because I think it'll be heartening for you here as we round out the show. Let me just read to you from a couple of aspects of the decision. This is from the three-judge panel. We reject in the strongest possible terms the state's attempt to finish its intentional decision to dilute minority votes with a veneer of legislative regularity. These events, the court went on, led by Stanley Marcus, these events, along with the legislator's contemporaneous statements about race, support only one inference. The purpose of the 2023 map was to distribute Black voters across districts to dilute their votes. That's called cracking, at least in part because they are Black. Counsel argues mightily that the legislature's partisan motives, not racist, drove the creation of that map. But this enormous record contains no evidence of a partisan motive, and the only evidence on the issue cuts against one. Alabama's legislative leadership testified that overtures from National Party leaders did not affect their work. No, we got this. Okay, Republican National Committee, we're not worried about making new Republicans. We're just trying to get rid of Black power. Wow. So it's, the Alabama governor, she's already said, I'm going to appeal. So it's going to land back at the United States Supreme Court. Now, they said if there's intentional racism, and this 3-judge panel has looked at thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of evidence, so that should be the record, as opposed to the Supreme Court being a roving commission, as they called it today, a roving commission to try to right wrongs. Okay, well, then the Supreme Court shouldn't be a roving commission to try to right wrongs, untethered to the actual record developed by the lawyers and the judges in the adversarial process either. But we'll see what happens. It's probably going to be another one of these shadow docket cases without oral argument, and we'll get some sort of crappy 1-paragraph opinion. Although they may surprise me. They may say, well, this is the one case that we were anticipating. There is a racism here, just to throw us a bone. Look, the reality is I don't like remapping any more than anybody else. But let me end it this way with a bit of hope, okay? They can remap to their heart's content. Yes, it'll put them into potentially better positions of power in 2028, okay? But maps get changed and maps get rechanged, especially if the voter discontent leads to a change election at the midterms. And if I'm right, and I believe I'm going to be, that the demographics have so shifted against the Republican Party, Donald Trump and MAGA, in ways that they are not even anticipating, as they map anticipating 2024's results, miscalculating once again about where the public mood is against them for 2026, and they'll be caught with their pants down, right? That's because that demographic that has now shifted against them, right? The Hispanic vote, double digits against Donald Trump now, whereas they weren't before. The women vote, the Hispanic Catholic vote, the independent vote, the under 30 vote, the Black vote. If all of that where Donald Trump overperformed in 2024 to kick Kamala's backside, have now shifted back to historical locations, right? Eventually, you regress to the mean. When that happens, they don't have enough votes to win the House or the Senate, even if they start with a 10-seat lead, that they stole that which they could not earn from the public trust, period. So glad you're here. Went a little bit long, but we had what an amazing guest. I'm so honored to know Dani Bensky, to bring her on here as a survivor and a leader of that movement, and hopefully to brief our audience on a regular basis. You're here on The Intersection. Support us on the work that I do, Michael Popok, over on Legal AF, the YouTube channel. We're trying to get to 1.2 million subscribers there. Become a subscriber on Legal AF YouTube, on Legal AF Substack. We'll eventually get the assets up on Legal AF there it is, on Legal AF Substack, where you can become a paid member or a regular member and get some live reports, including I'm doing one on Thursday with Adam Klasfeld of All Rise News. And then The Intersection itself always needs your love and your help. Listen to us on the audio version of the podcast. Leave 5-star reviews and comments. Tell people about the YouTube version, because there's different rankings and ratings related to all of them. And thanks for being here in the chat tonight. Spirited group that was in there tonight. I saw a lot of cross communication among people in the chat. Many people love the guest and, of course, the show, and others were like, who is this Popok guy? It was a very interesting collection of people in tonight's chat, but I appreciate you all and being here and being so supportive and of our sponsors. These are the ways to keep all things Midas Touch and Legal AF on the air. So tomorrow night, I got a special edition of Legal AF at the midweek. Karen's traveling. I'll be joined by Dina Dahl and Lisa Graves. Both of them, who are the Monday anchors for Legal AF, are going to be joining me at the midweek. Saturday, I'll be on with Ben Mycelis. And of course, next Tuesday, back here on The Intersection. So until my next report, shout out to the Midas Mighty, the Legal AFers, and the Intersectionists. Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.